The average Spotify stream pays an artist about 4 tenths of a cent. To make $1, a song needs to be played roughly 250 times. To make minimum wage for a month in the US, an independent artist would need somewhere around 4.5 million streams. Most songs on Spotify will never come close. Here's the part that makes this stranger than it first sounds. Spotify itself says there's no such thing as a per stream rate at all. It's technically true, and understanding why explains almost everything wrong with how musicians get paid in the streaming era. It didn't used to work this way. When someone bought a CD or a paid album download, that specific purchase was tied to that specific artist, split however their contract said, but connected directly to what you actually bought. Streaming severed that direct line completely. Spotify doesn't pay artists per play. It runs on something closer to a giant shared pool. Every month, all the money coming in, subscription fees, and ad revenue combined, gets added together into one pot. Spotify keeps around 30% for running the platform. The remaining 70% gets split among every rights holder on the entire service based on something called Stream Share, your percentage of all the listening that happened on Spotify that month, across every user, everywhere. That single detail changes everything about what your subscription actually does. When you pay for Spotify Premium and spend the whole month streaming one small independent artist on repeat, your money doesn't mostly go to them. It goes into the same pool as everyone else's and gets redistributed according to what the entire platform listened to. If millions of other people spend that same month streaming a handful of global superstars, a large share of your own subscription fee effectively ends up in those superstars' pockets instead, no matter who you personally chose to support. Geography makes the math even less predictable. Spotify Premium costs about $13 a month in the United States. In India, it costs closer to $1.50. Both count as one premium stream in the data, but they don't generate anywhere near the same amount of money because each country's royalty pool is only as big as what people in that country actually paid Spotify that month. 1,000 US premium streams might feed something like $4 or $5 into the pool. 1,000 premium streams from India at roughly a ninth of the subscription price might feed in closer to 50 cents. Two artists with identical stream counts, one popular mostly in the US and UK, one popular mostly across South Asia, can end up with wildly different payouts for what looks like the exact same success. In 2024, Spotify made a change that made the pool dynamic even more explicit. Any track that doesn't reach at least 1,000 streams within a rolling 12-month window no longer generates royalties at all. Spotify's framing was that this stops fraud and cleans up noise in the system. Things like white noise tracks, ambient filler, or accidental duplicate uploads that were quietly siphoning tiny amounts out of the pool. There's a real argument for that, but the practical effect, whatever the intention, is that whatever those smallest, quietest streams would have been worth doesn't disappear or get refunded to listeners. It simply flows back into the same shared pool and gets redistributed toward the artists who are already streaming the most, the same handful of major names who need it least. And even the share an artist is owed doesn't arrive directly. Spotify pays the rights holder, not the musician. For independent artists, that's usually a distributor, companies like DistroKid or TuneCore, who either take a percentage of every payout or charge a flat annual fee instead, depending on which plan an artist signs up for. For artists signed to a label, the label receives the payment first and then pays the artist according to their contract, which under a traditional deal can mean the label keeps somewhere between 75 and 85% before the artist ever sees a cent. By the time a stream has been counted, pooled, split by stream share, paid to a distributor or label, and finally passed down to the person who actually wrote and recorded the song, it has usually gone through 3 or 4 separate hands. Spotify paid out roughly $9 billion in royalties in 2023 alone, and independent artists and labels collectively made up about half of that. By 2024, that annual figure had grown to around $10 billion, And the company says it has paid out nearly $60 billion to the music industry since it was founded. Those are real enormous numbers. They just don't translate into real money for most individual musicians because the pool model means success is relative, not absolute. Getting a million streams sounds like a massive achievement, and it is, but what it's actually worth depends entirely on how many billions of other streams happened on the platform that same month and who they belong to. It's worth saying that Spotify isn't simply pocketing the difference either. For most of its history, the company operated at a loss, despite all that revenue moving through it. 2024 was the first full calendar year Spotify had ever turned a profit, 18 years after it was founded, and it got there partly by cutting roughly a fifth of its workforce. That doesn't make the artist side of the equation feel any better. Musicians like Bjork have publicly described Spotify as one of the worst things to happen to working musicians, pointing to how little of that ocean of revenue actually reaches the people making the music. But it does mean this isn't simply a story about a wildly profitable company hoarding cash from artists. It's a three-sided squeeze. Listeners want a low monthly price, Spotify needs enough margin to survive as a business, and artists are left splitting whatever's left over, using a formula almost nobody outside the industry actually understands. There's been a proposed alternative floating around the music industry for years, usually called user-centric payments. Under that model, your monthly subscription fee would be split only among the specific artists you personally listen to that month, instead of dropping into one giant platform-wide pool shared by everyone. Supporters argue it would help niche and independent artists, whose fans tend to listen almost exclusively to them, at the expense of casual listeners who mostly stream a handful of huge global names. Several smaller streaming services and a handful of independent labels have experimented with versions of it. Spotify itself has tested elements of a more listening-based approach at a smaller scale, but the dominant model across the entire industry on Spotify and nearly every major competitor is still the same pooled system it's always been, in large part because switching a company this size to an entirely new accounting model, one that could shift billions of dollars away from the artists currently earning the most, is a much harder business decision than it sounds from the outside. None of this makes streaming itself the villain of the story. It replaced an industry that used to be built on physical sales and radio play, and it gave a genuine direct path to an audience for artists who never would have gotten major label attention in the first place. It also made music dramatically harder to pirate, which is its own kind of win nobody talks about anymore because it happened so long ago. But the platform that feels to a listener like a simple monthly subscription to unlimited music is underneath a shared financial pool where your money doesn't go where you think it goes, where two identical streams from two different countries are worth different amounts, and where a policy change in 2024 quietly decided that the smallest artists' shares should flow upward instead of out. The math was always this complicated. Streaming just made it easy to forget that it was happening at all.